Gizmo, caca!
I like to play with my little gremlin. What can I say?
You putz.
Welcome to yet another episode of Round the Clock Frights. My name is Josh. I hope you are all having a terrific holiday season. I know I am. In fact, let me guys show you something. I got this marvelous thing last night. This is a gift from my niece and nephew. Thank you so much, Jalen and Keegan. This is really amazing. I'm hopelessly addicted to iced coffee, particularly iced coffee with pumpkin spice flavored cream, so this is definitely going to come in handy. I love this gift so much. But today, I'm going to be talking about the one film that started it all. A film that opened my heart to a genre that exists solely to terrify and disturb. An 80s Christmas classic that made me fall in love with horror. Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2. Garbage Day! I'm just joshing you. I'm of course talking about Gremlins. A zany horror comedy about a peaceful small town that gets invaded by a multitude of vicious little demons. These monsters like to party hard. They smoke cigarettes, they guzzle bottles upon bottles of beer, and they even flash Phoebe Cates at one point. They're pretty demonic. But yes, Gremlins is the one that started it all. It's the film that made me fall in love with horror films. And a little backstory. When I was a little kid, I used to visit my local Blockbuster Video and examine the VHS covers. I was a very artistic kid, so I used to enjoy just examining all the cool VHS covers. And I remember the Gremlins one sticking out because it was the white VHS tape where, you had Gizmo in the front and you had that, monstrous shadow, lurking behind him on the wall, and it definitely creeped me out. For a good number of years, I did not want to watch this movie, even though my dad said it was alright. My mom thought otherwise. My mom didn't want me watching this movie. She thought I was too young to watch Gremlins because of all the horrific violence on display. Something about a gremlin being put into a blender. But anyway, she made it sound super, super scary. But eventually, I mustered the courage to watch the film, and I ended up loving it. And I took some notes here, so if you see me looking down, that's why. I love the Christmas setting, the Looney Tunes style humor, and, while Gremlins isn't an all-out horror film, like I said, it still contains enough creepy elements. I was around 9 years old when I first watched this movie, and there were certain scenes that definitely creeped me out. I remember sleeping, under the bed some nights because I was afraid a bunch of gremlins were going to jump up on my bed and rip me to shreds. I was that scared of Gremlins, but like I said, I also love the humor, and this film does belong to a list of 80s family films that push the boundaries by incorporating bits of violence. But I mostly grew attached to the character of Gizmo. Gizmo was such an adorable little furball. In fact, I wanted my own Mogwai when I was a kid. I felt confident that I could follow the rules, don't expose them to sunlight, don't feed them after midnight, don't get them wet. I'm sure I was pretty confident I could follow the rules. In fact, what I used to do is I would used to put my own stuffed animals into random boxes, pretending that they were Mogwais. I remember taking a stuffed Simba doll and putting it into a cardboard box, pretending that it was a little Mogwai. I had a lot of fun with this movie as a kid.
Hundreds of them.
Well, I don't know, maybe thousands.
They've been here too. Billy, what are these things? Where do they come from?
Gremlins, directed by Joe Dante. They'll be expecting you.
So, instead of this being a full-on analysis of the film, I'm going to be talking about all the reasons why I personally love Gremlins. First off, it's very obvious this film was heavily inspired by classic Looney Tunes cartoons, and I grew up watching Looney Tunes cartoons. I loved watching those on Cartoon Network. I just had so much fun watching those cartoons, and the director, Joe Dante, is a self-described Looney Tunes fanatic. In fact, he would go on to make his own Looney Tunes film back in 2003 called Looney Tunes Back in Action, starring George of the Jungle himself, Brendan Fraser. It's honestly not a bad film, and you can definitely tell that director Joe Dante was paying homage to the classic slapstick style of the Looney Tunes. There's one bit where a gremlin gets hit in the head with a mallet, and they use that cartoon doorbell sound effect. Or not a doorbell sound effect, but that classic knockout sound effect. And there's so much cartoon violence in this movie, but it all feels very tongue-in-cheek. the violence is never too horrific or over the top, at least in my opinion. And you can tell that Joe Dante was just having a good time with this movie. This is a horror comedy after all, so yeah, the fact that it reminded me so much of the classic Looney Tunes cartoons is another reason why I fell in love with it. Now let's talk about the hero of this film, Billy Peltzer, played by Zach Galligan. So, anyone who knows me knows that I like relatable protagonists in my horror films. I like to have people that I can root for, people that I can stand to watch for hours on end, and Billy is such a great hero because he's kind of relatable. He's somewhat geeky, he collects comic books, he watches black and white monster films, which he gets bonus points just for that. I mean, he watches the 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers at one point. I mean, this guy's got his priorities straight. I mean, he's got really good taste. And, he also loves his family. He's pretty much supporting his entire family because his father is this inventor who doesn't make a lot of money. So, he takes it upon himself to work at the bank so that he can help his family financially. And he's just a very likable protagonist. And he has a big crush on Phoebe Cates, which I don't blame him for at all. I think a lot of people back in the 80s had a thing for Phoebe Cates. And I wasn't even born in the 80s. But anyway, he's a really nice guy. And you want to see him get together with her. And he even draws a little cartoon inside a bar at one point. And going back to Joe Dante's love of Looney Tunes cartoons, his main character is someone who wants to make cartoons for a living. So there you go. Relatability. Gremlins also subverts expectations. This has been noted before, but audiences weren't expecting this type of film. Especially after the release of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. This movie has Steven Spielberg's name attached to it, which we will get into a little bit, because it's another reason why I love this movie. So people weren't expecting something so mean-spirited and, I guess, gruesome. Did they forget that this man directed Raiders of the Lost Ark? I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark had plenty of gore in it. There's a scene where a man's face melts. So, yeah, Gremlins, maybe it was in the marketing, but I just love how this film subverts expectations because you think it's going to be a cute, feel-good family film, but around the halfway point, it transforms into a dark, mean-spirited horror comedy, and I have a dark sense of humor, so I like watching that kind of stuff. Just the fact that it makes you think it's going to be this wholesome, charming family film. It's set in this town that would be straight out of a Frank Capra, fever dream. And you just see these gremlins come in and just tear this town to pieces, and it's just so mean, and I love it. Speaking of the humor, I do have to talk about some of my favorite comedic moments in the film. Okay, so the death of Mrs. Deagle. Mrs. Deagle is set up as the town grump. She's this old curmudgeon who treats everyone like garbage. We see her confront Billy at the beginning of the movie because his dog has destroyed this ceramic snowman that she keeps in her front yard, I guess. But she's like the Wicked Witch of the West. She's designed to absolutely hate, and she does get her comeuppance in the end in a really, really funny sequence where the gremlins pretend to be Christmas carolers. They actually dress up in winter clothing and start singing Christmas songs outside her house, and she has a panic attack, and what happens is that she runs back to her mechanized chair, the type of chair that goes up a stairway, and the gremlins have hotwired it, so it just goes at full speed. She just ascends up the stairway at a really fast pace, and she ends up flying through the window on the top floor, just plummeting to her death, and it's just so darkly comical, and it's the type of death that you would want to see bestowed upon a character like this. She's pretty much the Mr. Potter of this movie, and like I said, she gets what she deserves. There's also a couple of really funny bits with the Gremlins. There's one scene where Gremlin is just sitting inside a bar listening to jazz music. He has like a bowler hat on, and he's just sitting there, looking cool, and the camera is slowly zooming in on his face. You have the jazz music playing in the background, and then all of a sudden this other gremlin comes in with a sock puppet on its hand, just making goofy sounds and annoying the heck out of this cool gremlin. And that's when that's the moment where Gremlin gets hit in the head with a mallet, because that's exactly what this Gremlin does. He gets so fed up with this annoying Gremlin that he smacks him in the head with a hammer. It's marvelous. Another funny moment is when you have, the Gremlin in the ski mask, holding Phoebe Cates up at gunpoint, just following her, with with its pistol in hand, and I don't know, I just think that part is kind of funny. And then, of course, you have the really bizarre Santa Claus monologue delivered by Phoebe Cates, and she delivers it pretty straight-faced, which is what makes it funny to me. I mean, she's acting like she's in a heartbreaking drama, like she's in an award-winning A24 film. She's telling the story about how about how her father dressed up as Santa Claus, slipped down the chimney and broke his neck, dying instantly, and wow. It's so random and so dark, but it gets a good chuckle out of me. Again, dark sense of humor. I regret nothing. There are some scary sequences in the film. My favorite scary sequence is the one that takes place inside the school. You have that science teacher, looking for the transformed Mogwai. He's not entirely sure what it's going to look like, but the buildup is just so great because he's by himself in this dark, empty classroom, and audiences didn't know what the Gremlins looked like entirely. So, there's some great buildup and suspense there, and the Gremlin is toying with him. He turns the film projector back on. He, is just running all around the classroom, teasing this poor man, until he foolishly offers the Gremlin a piece of candy, and the Gremlin presumably bites his hand off. At least I think that's what happens, but it's a pretty creepy sequence. And when I first watched this film, again, I was really scared of seeing the Gremlins on screen, so I was on the edge of my seat. I was really terrified by this scene. And of course the payoff, Billy walks into the classroom and he sees the teacher dead on the floor. At least I think he's dead. They don't show his head, so I always assume the Gremlin may have bitten his head off, but you never know. He has like a needle stuck into his backside, so yeah, pretty decent payoff. And as I mentioned in another video of mine, the video where I talk about the controversy surrounding 2024's Terrifier 3, I'm a sucker for Christmas horror films. And Christmas and the horror genre go surprisingly well together. And in my opinion, this is still the best Christmas horror movie ever made. Some people like to point to something like Silent Night, Deadly Night, which is a little bit more serious, but I don't know. Nothing tops Gremlins for me. I still watch it, every Christmas. In fact, I just watched it earlier today in preparation for this video. It's not a feel-good Christmas movie, but in my opinion, the best kinds of Christmas movies aren't feel-good, if that makes sense. Instead of watching movies like A Christmas Carol, or I'm trying to think of another great example, Miracle on 34th Street, watch stuff like Gremlins or Krampus. That'll really get you in the mood for the holidays. And of course, this was produced by none other than Steven Spielberg, who just happens to be my favorite director of all time. It wasn't directed by him, but Steven Spielberg is pretty much responsible for this movie being made. Chris Columbus wrote the script when he was very young, and somehow Steven Spielberg got his hands on it, and Steven Spielberg actually called Chris Columbus one point, and Chris Columbus initially thought that it was a prank, but it was Steven Spielberg, offering to bring his script to life, and it pretty much... yeah, he's pretty much responsible for starting Chris Columbus's career as well. And Spielberg is also responsible for a couple of other things in this film. Originally, Gizmo was supposed to transform into the evil Stripe, who was the leader of the Gremlins, but Spielberg thought that Gizmo was really cute and wanted him to be the hero of the movie. So, Joe Dante conceded, and Gizmo didn't transform. He stayed his cute, lovable self, and he ended up being the ultimate hero of this film, because he does greatly assist in the defeat of Stripe at the end of the movie. And Gremlins was originally supposed to be much darker than it turned out to be. In fact, if they had shot the original script, this probably would have been an R-rated movie. There was supposed to be a scene where the Gremlins actually decapitate Billy's mom, and you're supposed to see her head just tumbling down the staircase. Yeah, that definitely... That would have made this unquestionably a horror film. No one would have questioned its horror status after that, but Spielberg insisted on toning the violence down. He wanted to make it a little bit more family-friendly, but they still got away with some adult material in this movie. But yeah, the fact that Steven Spielberg's name is attached to this film just makes me love it even more. Finally, guys, I love stories about regular small folk who are forced to fight, dangerous monsters. Other examples include The Blob, Jaws, and Killer Clowns from Outer Space. It's inspiring to see normal people conquering evil beings that threaten their evil existence. They don't have the resources of, like, say, the military, but they're still able to defeat, whatever monsters they encounter, by the end. And I just really like stories like that. I love horror films that take place in small towns. I'm not from a small town, but I do enjoy stories like that, and Gremlins is a great example. But yeah, Gremlins, it made me hungry for other movies of this type. Not long after, I found myself popping in VHS copies of Alien and Jaws. So, as a kid, watching Gremlins made me feel brave, and it relates to why I love watching horror movies as an adult. I feel like I've conquered something by watching horror movies. I feel like I feel really brave and courageous. The fact that I was able to sit down and watch a scary horror movie all the way through, it just makes me feel stronger. And it's one of the many reasons why I love watching horror films. I was originally terrified of Gremlins as a kid, but I finally decided to watch it, and I ended up loving it, but I also felt rather brave. But yes, Gremlins is the one. It's the film responsible for my love of horror films. It just has so many things that I like in terms of storytelling and other stuff, and I will never get tired of it. I've watched it so many times over the years. I mean, obviously, I've seen way more disturbing horror films since then. Stuff like, Martyrs, The Human Centipede, Kirk Cameron, Saving Christmas. That's a scary one. But Gremlins holds a very special place in my heart, and like I said, I will never ever get tired of watching it. These guys are pretty awesome. Yeah, I consider them, movie heroes. They're definitely heroes in my eyes because they like to party, have fun, and cause a ruckus. Just like me. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me in my discussion of Gremlins, my all-time favorite Christmas horror film. What are some films that inspired your love of horror? I would love to know, your guys' stories. So, please leave your comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of your other favorite Christmas horror films? Christmas is just around the corner, guys. I hope you're all staying safe out there. I hope you have a really good holiday season. And whatever you do, if you do get your hands on a mogwai, again, don't get them wet, don't feed them after midnight, and don't expose them to sunlight. Although, I mean, when is it safe to feed them again after midnight? They never made it really clear, but, whatever. A lot of classic films have plot holes in them, but who gives a shit? Anyway, guys, thank you so much. If you liked what you saw here, please subscribe to my channel for more horrific content. Have a very scary day, boils and ghouls, and one last thing. Look, guys! Take care, guys.